Baltimore has one of the highest overdose death rates in the country. Twice as many lives are lost in Baltimore to overdose than to homicide. Emboldened by a recent federal court ruling, officials in parts of the United States are proposing sanctioning safe consumption sites to help save lives.
Well, I think the overdose prevention sites are very good because it keep you from being alone when you're using.
The effort in Baltimore has been spearheaded by Council President Brandon Scott.
Since 2015, there's been 3,500 fatal overdoses in Baltimore. That outweighs the number of people that we lost to even gun violence in Baltimore City. This is about us rehumanizing people and understanding that our brothers and sisters, our mothers and sons who are struggling with addiction are human and that they deserve to be treated fairly and they deserve to get the help that they need.
This effort builds on the work that activists in the field of harm reduction have been doing for years.
Keeping people alive, keeping people safe and healthy. And even deeper than that, it's around ending the racist war on drugs. It's around ending criminalization.
Rajni Goodvadalati is the community organizing manager at Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition. She says informal safe consumption sites have existed in Baltimore for years, despite the heavy-handed tactics employed in the war on drugs.
Baltimoreans have figured out ways around it to keep each other safe and alive, right? We have buildings that are vacant, we use them, right? People call it squatting, people call it whatever. People use them to keep each other safe.
Europe and Canada have used legal safe consumption sites for years, with dramatic results. And studies have shown they've helped reduce overdose deaths, promote cessation, and help get users into treatment. Baltimore was one of the first cities to adopt needle exchange services. And harm reduction advocates say the potential to save lives by giving people a safe place to go is the next step in battling what has been called the opioid epidemic or overdose crisis. Journalist Brandon Soderberg has detailed the potential as well as the challenges put forth by Council President Brandon Scott to establish safe consumption sites, or as Baltimore officials have been calling them, overdose prevention sites, for Filter Magazine, a harm reduction nonprofit.
In the States, a Philadelphia nonprofit called Safe House has been pushing to introduce one of these in Philadelphia. They took their fight to the federal court because opposition by federal court was based on this thing called the Crack House statute, which goes back to Joe Biden and the war on drugs, classic war on drugs stuff. And basically, the argument was that this falls under the same concerns as a crack house or a rave, because it's a place where you're facilitating and enabling people to do drugs. Therefore, it's illegal, and it's particularly illegal under the statute. What a federal judge decided was that this was not the same as those places because it is facilitating people doing drugs safely, and its express intent is to help people do drugs safely or to get off of drugs.
Safe injection sites have existed for years around the world. What's the track record been, and how does that fit with this narrative about you have to be tough on crime, treat this as a moral issue, and the idea that you're putting people in danger by having safe consumption?
Yeah, so safe consumption sites, again, they've existed since I believe at least the 80s in Europe and other places. They're kind of this classic idea where most of the world's way ahead of us on this and the drug war. The United States hasn't had one. The first one in North America was Insight in Vancouver that opened in 2003. And the track record of these places is incredibly good in terms of not having people die, not having any fatal overdoses. So when people overdose at these sites, there are medical professionals or other people there that can help them not die from that overdose through naloxone and even just plain old CPR. I mean, a metaphor that Russell Maynard, who's a person who works through Insight in Vancouver, provided to me was that they're ostensibly lifeguards. It's someone, and he says that in a really modest way, like you want to think this is a really super complicated idea, but it's just having people there to watch and observe and help people if they're overdosing, drowning in this metaphor, and help them from drowning. You stop them from dying. You can't stop someone from drowning if you're not there to help them.
You talked about the stigma about drugs, and it permeates in our society. And like with anything else that permeates in our society, it's also reflected in journalism as well, and the words that's used to describe and how we treat the subjects of these stories.
The local paper here, the Baltimore Sun, kind of generally wrote about the same issue that I did for Filter. Filter is kind of partially a nonprofit harm reduction publication. That's part of their job is to provide strong and informed coverage about drugs and the drug war, and also sort of counter these narratives. And it's sort of bigger than the Baltimore Sun, but that article that the Sun did about the same issue kind of fell into a lot of the problems you see. We've really been moving away from calling people who use drugs addicts. You shouldn't assume someone who uses drugs is an addict. That's also certain drug users have specific definitions of what addiction is. There's that concern. And then you have larger, like even for me, I don't like the word addict, but I've always thought that calling someone or calling myself as a former drug user a user was okay. While it might be okay for me, it's not sort of the publicly understood stigmatizing language. If you hang out with people who use drugs, the word junkie is used sometimes proudly, but the word junkie has a very different meaning if you're not in that community or if you're some crappy politician talking about how we need to close these places down. So that kind of stigmatizing language. And then you have just a lot of assumptions about drugs that go back to that same sort of drug war propaganda that I think reporters and community members too get caught up in, of just associating the presence of drugs and the presence of people who use drugs with crime, as if those things can't be extracted.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.